welcome to the Business of Data monthly Leading Female Executive LinkedIn Live. Each month I meet with some brilliant female executives from the data and analytics space to chat about the biggest challenges and opportunities that we face today. Now this is live, it's happening in real time, so please do get those questions in as and when you think of them, because that's the whole reason of doing it live, so that we can tailor the content to you. And of course, get those comments in about what you think about the content as well. Now, today we are talking all about data for good, and I, for one, am very excited to do so. So I'm going to bring forward our wonderful panelists for today. Lovely to see you all. Let's start by just doing a quick round of introductions so everyone knows who you are. Joanne, if you could take it away, please.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. Good evening. I'm Joanne Stonier. I'm the Chief Data Officer for MasterCard, and I'm in New York.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Maritza, lovely to see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm tuning in from Cape Town in South Africa, and I am the head of data for BNP Paribas Personal Finance South Africa, and we trade as RCS Group.
Amazing. Thank you, Maritza. And last but not least, Sathya.
Hi, everyone, from London. So we've got a truly global panel this week, which is great. I was, up until a few days ago, the head of data governance at Chanel globally, and now I'm forging my own path, setting up a business, True Change, to focus on data, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So data for good is close to my heart.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you stayed with us after your transition, because I know you must be incredibly busy, Sathya, but I thought I could tempt you away with this panel discussion, because as you said, absolutely in your wheelhouse today. So welcome to Fazana, Una, Meza. Lovely to see you in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we've got about 25 minutes here to dive into the depths of it, but I think what would be beneficial for everyone is if we start out with really understanding what data for good is to you, because there's lots of definitions. It means various things to various people. So let's start that out. Sathya, I'm going to come to you first. What does data for good mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think sometimes it can feel like an overused term or something that's really daunting. So I would almost say data for good should be about, based on your sphere of influence and where you have impact, using data to drive a more equitable world. So for me, because of my lived experiences, because of my background in data governance, which I guess is the more business angle to look at things like data strategy and process, as well as championing diversity, equity, and inclusion, for me, data for good is about connecting those dots. So how do we make sure we use data to reveal the truths around intersectionality, because I myself am intersectional of race and gender. How do we use data to drive our diversity, equity, and inclusion ambitions? And how do we use equity thinking in how we deliver data products? Because bias is something that we do not want to build into the future of our world. And actually, data-driven products is driving the future of our world.
Absolutely. Now, I've just asked in the comments, what does data for good mean to you as well? So audience, please do chime in with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. And Sathya, I think that's so interesting that you mentioned about the segmentation of identity. I think traditionally data analytics, we like to put things in boxes. And I think we can struggle when something or someone fits in so many boxes. It's how do we work with that? It can be very complex. So thank you for bringing that into the mix. Maritza, how about yourself? Data for good, what does that mean to you?
So I want to add on to what Sathya said around using data for social transformation. So definitely it means sort of making a better world for everyone through the use of data, for me as well. But I want to add to that also the virtuous use of data. And I think Sathya did mention this as well, using data governance and making sure that we are thinking about the impact of how we use data analytics on our customers, so data ethics. And then thirdly, I think for me, it also means doing good in data. So as data leaders, it's so important that we get involved in things like education, for example, and making sure that we are democratizing data and analytics careers for all people, and people at different levels of education, etc. So it means those three things for me. But I think in summary, data for good for me means that we put people at the center of data and analytics.
Absolutely, as you mentioned, so crucial for the work we do. And I love that point you make about education, because something that I've grown to learn is that most leaders in data analytics also see themselves as mentors, or that's the work that they do in bringing up the next generation of leaders. And as you say, going beyond that into how can we impact the STEM programs, how can we ensure that we are breeding the leaders that we need for tomorrow, today. So really great thoughts. Joanne, round us out. Is there anything else you'd like to add to those brilliant definitions?
It's so interesting, because I think that MasterCard has been trying to use our data we first called it data philanthropy, and then we called it data for good. I think now we are calling it really data for social impact, or positive social impact. So I think the terms keep evolving as we really, everything that Satya and Maritza said is true. I think we've been on a journey at MasterCard as we created our Center for Inclusive Growth it's almost going on 10 years now, where we really have a commitment toward kind of improving society overall. And I think data is one element that can be used for that. I think lots of organizations have a commitment to using their financial assets, right? Or their people assets, right? We have, lots of programs where individuals do volunteer work. And I think MasterCard also then began looking at its technology assets. And the last group of assets that we began realizing were going to be of use in this conversation were our data assets. And so I think when we get to data for good, I think that that's part and parcel of our corporate mindset, that we use our financial, our people, our technology, and our data assets all in combination for positive social change. And all of the things that Satya and Maritza talked about, including kind of the ethical use of data, but also really looking at how do we really impact our world in a positive way. And for us, it's really this idea of inclusive growth and all the different ways that can be looked at, all the way through to data literacy, looking at that from a mitigation of bias, making sure that our data is inclusive. All of those things are super important, but also really having some projects that we have contributed to really for really solving kind of those societal problems. And if you look at what we're all still living through with COVID, how do we contribute data insights and analytics to solving those type of problems that really impact the social fabric of our lives? And I think, to me, that's also part of data for good.
Amazing. Thank you so much there, Joanne. Really in-depth answers. I'm keen to pull on a couple of threads there that you've mentioned, but let's widen this out. Now, data for good can sometimes be misconstrued as kind of the fluffy stuff, right? It's the things that in traditional boards, it would have been laughed out the room, but now we're seeing a greater presence and understanding for its need. So Satya, I'll come to you first on this. How can we all take part in this way of thinking in practical terms? Joanne shared some there, but I wonder if you could expand a bit for experiences that you've had or intend to kind of build on in this way.
Yeah, so I'll give you one tangible example, and you will hear a thread from me, which is that focus of bridging diversity, equity, inclusion with data. One simple thing is, let's not wait as data leaders or as data teams, wait to be called upon or tapped on the shoulder by our DEI teams or our leaders who are trying to drive equity. Let's actually come to them, because I actually think we have the skills, the capability, understanding around data and its complexity in terms of collection, reporting, how to use it for metrics, how to use data to drive business outcomes. To me, DEI is just another business outcome. And I think in practical terms, a year ago, I started a forum of bringing data and DEI leaders together, because I just felt that we were not providing and using our data skills and assets in service of broader agendas within our own organization. So for me, I could give you so many examples, but one kind of really practical call to action is if you're in a data team within your organization and you don't know your diversity, equity, and inclusion person, reach out, build the relationship, because you can be of use to them and they can be of use to you in terms of data ethics and how we build equity by design into what we do. So something practical, could feel small, but doable today.
That's what we like. We like doable actions. And I think what's really interesting there, Satya, as you mentioned about don't wait for someone to tap you on the shoulder. I think traditionally this can feel maybe a little bit out of our world. This is HR, this is, you know, diversity and inclusion, that's their department. This isn't something that we can kind of talk in perhaps, but we absolutely know that's not the case. So I think as leaders, if we can empower everyone to say, hey, if you've got a passion in this area, or if you know and think it's important and want to get involved, you are enabled and encouraged to do that. Again, you don't have to be invited to participate. That collaboration work, really interesting. Maritza, how about yourself? What are the practical ways of Data for Good have you been part of? Have you seen that you thought were really quite cool?
So, as I said earlier, Data for Good for me means that we put people at the center of data and analytics. And I think as data leaders, we have to, exactly like Satya said, we've got to also drive that conversation around how we can use data for projects that's, you know, doesn't always get the attention because it may not have the commercial outcomes that certain projects that usually get prioritized get. But I do think that we can be the champions for some of those projects. And I think the best example in banking and financial services is financial inclusion. So we exclude a lot of people from more traditional products like credit cards and loans, because we still use traditional risk scorecards and risk modeling, which requires full credit backgrounds and records. And a lot of people do not have a full credit record. So we can use data to fill in some of those gaps and find alternative ways to determine someone's credit worthiness. And in that way, we can actually open up access to financial products to people who usually wouldn't have that access. But again, I would say as a data leader, you always have to think about what is the impact of what we as a business and we as a data team have on people, whether that's customers, employees, or the community.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting you mentioned about the commercial kind of return of investment side, because again, that kind of attitude I spoke about at the beginning around it being a bit more fluffy than the other topics we could talk about. There is a return on investment. And I think it would be a hard push for anyone to say there's absolutely no return of investment. It's just perhaps a little bit harder than the traditional ways of projects to say, this is the number you're going to get out of this activity. But I think that calculation can absolutely certainly be done. It's just how we do it. So I've just been distracted. So Jim has just commented, wow, back to the community-based character lending, using data to build characters. Love it. Thank you so much, Jim, for participating. Then Joanne, I saved you for last because just before we hit live, you said, I'm absolutely excited about this topic because it's absolutely what MasterCard is absolutely about. So I'm hoping you can share a couple of examples of Data for Good, expand on what you mentioned earlier, because I think this is a real opportunity for you to just really show those examples and for people to buy in and do it themselves in their own organizations.
Yeah, so we do quite a lot in this area. I think that we have lots of different examples to share. We've had a commitment to using data in lots of different forms and really information science to further all sorts of areas. So certainly we started with financial inclusion, and then you'll notice that I talked about the Center for Inclusive Growth because we recognize that our data could be a useful asset as you looked at ways to solve different societal problems as different organizations came to us once we kind of admitted that our data might be of use, right, and might be helpful. But we don't really share our raw data is one of the things that many organizations didn't understand, right? We have financial transactions that we are custodians of, and so we can't share the raw data, but we're more than happy to share insights. Well, what type of insights? And what we found out about Data for Good, right, is that there's a wide range of organizations that are interested in having information, but they may not have the data scientists themselves. And so they have a need for organizations like MasterCard or other organizations to provide infrastructure, to provide data scientists, and to provide sometimes the data design thinking to actually take advantage of the data that's out in the world. And so we got very busy also helping to identify what are the needs in Data for Good to actually make data available to solve societal problems. And so we've actually done a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, the OECD, the United Nations, in identifying some of the areas in which ecosystems actually have to be built to enable private sector data to be available to solve public sector problems, right? And what we're finding is that more and more now governments are getting into the act, academic institutions are getting into the conversation, so that all of us together as kind of world communities can begin to build the tools that are necessary to kind of find what we call the data recipients, right, which are kind of the maybe NGOs and other organizations have a need to find data to solve a problem for a certain community. And then the data donors, which would be organizations like MasterCard that might have a really interesting data set that might solve a data problem, right? And then in between are a whole host of enablers, right, that are needed in order to actually get the data insights into the right hands to solve a given problem, right? And there's a whole host of technology enablement, legal contractual enablement, privacy, security, etc., right? So all of these things are actually part of an ecosystem that is needed for Data for Good, okay? So on top of that, right, we've also done a ton of work with trying to figure out, so how do we bring data scientists into our organization to actually then do the work? And so we created a Data Fellows program where we actually have different thinkers in different problems, whether it's kind of climate change, whether it's economic studies. We've brought in different thinkers to work alongside our data scientists to answer different research problems. And so they look at our data in tandem with other data sets in kind of different, what we call data sandboxes, right? Where they can co-author and co-research different problems so that we can be part of the solution without really letting our data go afield. So that has been another area that we have contributed in. And then COVID happened. And so we also have realized that our data, while it's mostly economic data, right, we don't have really health data, but what we could do is look at the patterns of information and understand what the impacts were going to be on locations as things opened and closed. We also discovered that our data is also impactful for climate. And how is that? Well, when climate events happen, we can tell when things are going back online. So when there's been the fires in the west coast of the United States or tornadoes or hurricanes, what has happened is our information is helpful to first responders when things begin to recover, because what happens is a gas station will reopen and we start receiving transactions. So we can say to first responders, you can go here for lodging or for gasoline or for food. And so those are the types of products that can be helpful to begin to give out to governments and local first responder teams so that they can have information. So there's a world out here of Data for Good that I agree with Satya that it requires data experts to help think through, right? As well as doing it in ways that are privacy and security sensitive. So, and then on top of it, we realized that there aren't enough data scientists, so we did a partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation called data.org to start training data scientists in this area. So I could go on and on. I'm going to stop here because I'm going to let other people chime in. But you can see that this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because my team and I have worked a lot on this, along with Shamina Singh and Mike Froman and others at MasterCard who actually run this center, because we really do think that doing well by doing good is kind of the way to actually move things forward for all of us in society.
Absolutely fantastic. Maritza, I know you wanted to jump in quickly on that as well.
Yeah, so it's just, you know, Joanne, you made me think of something in terms of data for good, which I haven't thought about before this conversation. But really what you're also saying is that doing a good in data means that as data leaders, we need to build communities. And I think that is so important that, you know, we take the lead and that we start finding or build the bridges between different communities and bring people together, even if it's unrelated, like in Joanne's example. That's absolutely amazing, and almost bridging silos, not only in our own organizations, but also in our communities and in our industries. So
That's
very
right.
inspirational, Joanne. Thanks for, you know, letting that light bulb go off.
Yeah, what we found is that many organizations can do things, you know, with another organization, but getting that many to many is one of the things that we're trying to figure out, right? So I see in the chat someone saying, so who are these enablers? Oftentimes it takes like a civil society organization like the United Nations or the World Economic Forum. I can give you an example in the telecommunications space. There's an organization called Dial, and right now they've just published a paper for telecommunications organizations for that kind of cross-industry cooperation. If you think about how telecommunications data can be so powerful, right? If you think about that type of information being shared, but there's not standards for that. So enablers, right, come in all different kinds of forms and formats. A lot of these, and Satya, this is going to be true for kind of your new venture, are smaller organizations that are concentrating on solving problems on the ground. And it's everything from technical infrastructure to allow the data to flow, to legal contracts, to, you know, as we share information, there's lots of issues, right, about who's going to be responsible at each step of the way, who's going to be responsible if there's a breach, God forbid, right, as well as protecting the information. Some of the most vulnerable people in society, we have to be really careful because we want that data. We want to use it for positive purposes, right? We also have to remember, and we also want some of those attributes to go into some of the inclusivity that Satya was talking about. We have to be careful because if that data is in the wrong hands or at the wrong time in the wrong way, it can put people in terrible danger. So there's lots in this topic that's just really interesting, and it's a whole field of study for data professionals. The more I dig into it, the more there's there.
Absolutely. And that's actually what I want to have as my final question, Joanne, is what are the benefits that data can give to wider society? Is there any examples that you guys can give that you're super excited about to see help? I mean, I'm going to kick off because last week I was lucky enough to join Morgan Templars, who's a data leader at Highmark Health. She's one of our regulars and advisory board members. And her Clubhouse room was about the Internet of Things and technology within agriculture. And it was so fascinating to see how data is going to benefit the wider society for both our consumption, but also the animal wellness. So they were talking about having sensors placed on livestock and understanding animal behavior, that if they part from the herd, they may need veterinary attention, and the ability to really understand the data of temperatures within racehorses so that you can identify when they might need help way beyond what we're able to do at the moment. So I was so excited to see the social good of animal wellness, just a thing that's a passionate to my heart, bit random, but it was very interesting to me. I mean, Joanne, I'll go back round. Is there anything particular that you're really excited to see data helping in that way?
So I think that we need to look at this as kind of the part and parcel of what we do as data professionals. I think that we have thought about it as something other. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it has to be part and parcel of what you think about as we've moved through COVID, and we've recognized that data for social issues is something that every organization now needs to contribute, right? And so data for good, in other words, really means it's not just for commercial purposes, but for societal impact. And what we have found is that studies that we've done for societal impact can actually be reapplied for commercial use, and things that we've done for commercial use can be applied for social impact. And I think that we have to get better and better at understanding that we live in a connected world. We've talked about that in other conversations, right? That data moves that way. And I think that also that Satya touched on this, and I'll turn it over to her, but that we need more inclusive data in order to solve our problems. And the best way to do that is to think inclusively about the problems we're trying to solve. The more we do that, it's almost a virtual cycle. We will get better information, right, to feed what we're thinking about, and then we will begin to solve in ways that actually begin to solve for everybody. And so I do think that data for good kind of puts that lens on things. And so I'm very, very hopeful that by incorporating this into our daily practices, I think we are going to get better outcomes for everybody, no matter which kind of side of the house we're looking at.
Absolutely. Sathya, I'll pass it straight to you.
Yeah, so I think there are some discrete things. One, again, maybe an actionable thing from the previous chat is, you might be thinking, right, there are so many options. Where do I start? So within your organization, there might be a social commitment team or whatever the name of the department is, where they already have partnerships with social enterprises where colleagues volunteer their time and skills. I would say as a starting point, reach out to those and actually work with your social commitment team to understand which of those social enterprises actually require data people or data knowledge. Because I think Joanne mentioned that, but let's leverage what's there. I think for me, data needs to be an essential part of shining a light on the things that were invisible or fell through the cracks. So because only then can we create solutions that cater for those things. But right now there is a lot of invisibility. So speaking about, some of the things that people have become more aware of in recent times, I think, looking at racial equity and inequity and how that intersects with gender is really important. And in terms of concrete measures of that, when we are creating products, when we are serving our customers, where are the communities that we are just not seeing or serving, and they're not even factoring into how we test products, who we even design products for? Because actually the social good is not separate to the commercial benefit. We are not, right now, I can tell you, it doesn't matter how amazing your organization is, you are not serving all of those communities that require your service or your product. And I will always talk about intersectionality. If you don't know what that word is, do a quick Google search. It is really important because as we start to cater for issues in terms of who is underserved, how can we use data to help those underserved people and actually provide what is already our business, our product or service to those people. Let's make sure we don't just look at race, or we just look at gender, or we just look at class, because actually the intersection of those is where the most invisibility lies. So I could talk about so many things, but I think we need to use data to shine a light on things. And then I think, as Joanne mentioned, another practical thing, let's make sure that that data about vulnerable people is protected. So an obvious example, we've gone through COVID. A quick thing, check with your HR department. We started collecting data as organizations about colleagues who were perhaps having health issues. We were collecting data that we didn't before, maybe people who were vulnerable. We need to make sure that that data doesn't go out of control. So I think that's the other takeaway I would just say, be proactive, go in there. There are established things and partnerships where you can already start making a change now and a positive impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sathya. And then Maritza, round us out, please.
So I'm going to add on to the idea of visibility and creating visibility. So as a South African, the one thing that I'm really excited about in terms of data is, we're such a young democracy, and I think we have an opportunity to use data to create visibility for just normal people around what our government is doing and giving people the access to data that they need to make decisions and inform decisions specifically for social good. So that could be data around, how your tax money is being spent, around education, access to services, etc. And there are some nonprofits in South Africa who's doing amazing work in this area, really visualizing quite complex data that's accessible to anyone and can be used by just anyone to make decisions. And that gets me really excited, because I think that will drive a society that is responsible and accountable and well governed.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maritza. Just glanced at the time. We're overrunning. Will we ever stick to time on these panel discussions? Probably not, because that's what happens when you mix passionate people with awesome topics. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to hear your thoughts. Now, if you are enjoying these types of discussions, please do remember to head over to the Business of Data platform and subscribe. And also make sure you're following us on socials as well, so that you're alerted for when we do go live for these discussions. Now, I did see that in the comment section there was a couple questions we didn't get a chance to answer. I am sure if I speak nicely to our speakers today, they will write you a reply. If not, we will make sure we cover those comments in future content. And don't forget, you have still the chance to register for the Business of Data Festival, which will be a collation of all of our wonderful speakers that you see regularly appearing in our broadcast. So make sure you register as well. But for now, thank you very much for joining us on a lovely sunny Monday, and we will see you very soon.